Okay, so let's talk about binomial factors. And the reason we want to talk about this is because it's important to understand when it comes to factoring by grouping, which is what this video is about. But before we get to some factoring by grouping examples, let's get to this binomial factor concept first. Now, a lot of times in factoring by grouping, you will end up with something like this, and these are binomial factors. The way that you write this in factored form is like such. You would take the thing that you see, so you see this twice, and then the other terms that are there you put in the other set, the other group. Now this is kind of a reverse distributive property. If we were to multiply these back out, what we would end up getting is x times this plus 4 times this, if you recall multiplying polynomials. So we're just doing a reverse distributive. The easiest way to see how to get from here to here is just take what you see written down the same twice, write that down, and then whatever's left you write in the other set. The key though is these need to be the same in order for you to do it that way. Let's look at a quick example. So what we have here is x times x plus 2 plus 3 times x plus 2. Notice these are the same, so we can write that down. And what's left is a y and a plus 3. So to factor, when it's like this, it's probably one of the easiest things to do. However, you could run into a case where you have to do a little something extra before you can actually do this. Let's look at that. Now let's look at this one. Notice we have a 2x times x minus 5 and then plus y times 5 minus x. Now if you recall in the last example, these two we said had to be the same. They have to be the same. So we have to do something to kind of get them to be the same. We have to figure out what can we do. Is there something we can do? Well, let's consider 5 minus x. If we put this negative x in the front, we can say, oh, that's the same as saying that's just negative x plus 5. Right? These two are equivalent. I'm just writing them in a different order. Well, then I look at this, I say, oh, wait, I can actually take out this negative. I can divide everything by negative 1. And if I do so, I get x, because negative x divided by negative 1 is positive x, and then I get minus 5, because negative 1 divided by, 5 divided by negative 1 is negative 5. And also notice if I distribute this back in, I get the same thing here. But what has that done for us? Well, instead of writing it like this, why don't we write it like this up here? Now, instead of that, I'll have a minus y times 1, which that's just y, x minus 5. Now, as you can see, these are both the same. Now we can write it the way we said. We write down what we see the same, what we see twice, we write that down, and we write down what's left. The trick here was, if you happen to see that they're both not the same, you have to ask yourself, is there something I can do to it to make these be the same? And in this case, there was. So we did that, and now we were able to factor it. It's important to be able to do that because sometimes you'll run into a question that this happens when you're factoring, and some students will go, oh, they're not the same, so I can't do it. But you got to make sure you really examine that to make sure that there's nothing that you can do to get them to be the same here. All right? And most of the time it just has to do with changing a sign or factoring out something that's negative. That's what you typically would do here. Okay, so now that you've seen this binomial factor concept, let's factor by grouping, because when we factor by grouping, we will end up getting something like this. So we're just building up to that. So let's get to that. Okay, so let's take what we just learned and apply it to the types of problems that you'll typically see here, which involve factoring by grouping. First off, a thing to note, when you're factoring by grouping, notice that there's 4 terms here. So when you see something with 4 terms, factoring by grouping is typically the way that you would want to do it, at least at this point from what you've learned so far. We first want to group these factors. So I'm going to take these 2 and put them in a group. And then over here, I'm going to take these 2 and put these in a group as well. So we've put these 2 terms together in its own set of parentheses, and then we did the same over here with that. And this is an example where we have this plus here. Notice both of these have a minus in there. We're in good shape right now because everything's lining up. Right now, everything kind of looks like it's going to work. Let's see. Let's take the common factor out of this. Remember, the common factor is the common number and then the common variable with the lowest power. If we look at 2 and 3, 2 and 3 do not have a common factor, so we can't take anything out there. However, the x's, we see there's both of these have x's in it. This one's x cubed or x to the 3rd, whereas this one is x squared. And if you recall, we can always take out the one that has the smallest power. So we can factor out an x squared from this. If I was to divide this by x squared, so 2x cubed over x squared, if we did that over here, and you don't have to do this, eventually you'll be able to do this in your head. But divide, if you need to write it out, you write it out on the side. 2x squared divided, I'm sorry, 2x cubed divided by x squared. Well, we see that we can subtract these exponents. So that's just going to become x, and that's 2 over 1. So that's just 2x. So divide these 2 and we just get 2x. Now let's divide these 2 here, 3x squared and x squared. That's just going to give us minus 3 when you divide that. Now let's look over here. Is there a common factor that we can take out of this? Well, they both don't have an x, so we can't take an x out anywhere. However, 4 is the greatest common factor that divides both 8 and 12. So if I took the 4 out, and again, dividing everything by the common factor here, which is 4, 8x divided by 4, that's just 2x. And negative 12 divided by 4, that's just negative 3. And notice what we have. We have these 2 being the same, and then we have these 2 items over here left. That's what we want, so let's write it down in factored form. Remember, we write what we see the same, write that down, and we write the other 2 terms out here on the outside. And this is how you factor by grouping. Notice that we just took this and broke it down into what you just saw in the last example. So this isn't one of the easier techniques in factoring. Let's take a look at one more example though, because there are some little things you got to look out for and watch out for. So let's look at that in the next one. Okay, let's look at this next example here of factoring by grouping. We're going to go through this one rather quickly. It's similar to the one we did last time, with one catch, which I will explain. Let's move that here. So, first off, we're going to write down our factors and group them together, or our terms. So I've grouped together the 3y cubed and the 4 minus 4y squared. Now notice this minus sign. If we put this minus sign here and group these terms together, this is the key part. The 6y, this becomes minus 8. That is the one part you need to really be careful about. When you bring this negative sign down here that's in the middle, you need to change the sign of whatever that term is on the very right. Because if I distribute this back in, remember, I will get minus 6y plus 8. We can't just change things. Meaning, we can't do something that changes the actual polynomial. Every time in algebra when you do one thing, you're just writing it in the same, you're writing it in a different way, but they mean the same thing. So if we put a plus 8 here, this is a totally different polynomial than the one that you see above. So make sure you factor out this minus sign. Now, let's look what's common here. It looks like the numbers don't have anything in common. The 3 and the 4, there's nothing in common. But a y cubed and a y squared, they both have y's in it. We take the smallest power, which is y squared. Now, if I divide this by y squared, all I'm left with is 3y. That's all I'm left with there. And if I divide this by y squared, all I'm left with is 4. Negative 4. All right, let's look on this side. The common factor here, it looks like, is a 2. We can take the 2 out of this. So let's bring this 2 out. Dividing here gives us 3y minus 4. All right, and now we have what we see here is the same thing twice, so we can write that down. And then what's left? Y squared minus 2. So that covers factoring by grouping. It's not that bad. It just takes a little bit of practice and you'll be fine. Hopefully that gave you a better understanding. I'll see you next time.